All right, welcome back to part 2 of the evening. So hopefully at this point you've had a chance to look over the article and get a bit of an understanding of the Gestalt principles and what they are, and more importantly, why they're important. This first page I did pull from several different sources and just kind of stuck them together to get an idea from a couple different perspectives. The one in the middle in particular, because it is specifically related to instructional graphics, I think is useful. But the main takeaways here, hopefully, are that when you're talking about visual materials, and we're talking about still visual materials, graphics, images, not movies, and so on, is that what Gestalt contributes is this understanding that when your student looks at something you've given them that is graphic in nature, their brain will process that image as a whole, that they will be looking at the entire thing. And if attention isn't paid on our end to how that whole is structured, that can get in the way of a student being able to get the information that they need. So they talk about here in the introduction that the basics of Gestalt is that we do see the whole, that all of the individual parts are grouped together and are processed in the brain as groups as opposed to as individual elements. In terms of the instructional graphics, that translates into how confusing something might be for a student. If their brain looks at the whole picture and the whole picture doesn't make sense as a whole, they're going to have a harder time grasping the individual pieces that are on that page. Even if those individual pieces are clear, looking at how the whole thing is put together is important. And it then goes on at the bottom of the first page to talk about the cognitive advantages. This simplifies, this principle allows us to process more information more quickly because our brain groups the information together rather than looking at it as individual elements. So if we can take advantage of this as instructors, we will be able to have students that can get more information more quickly and more efficiently from the graphics we've created, and develop greater understanding in our students. So that's the point of this particular approach, is that we are looking to improve the outcomes in our students. So then it goes into the laws. There are more laws. I chose these 5 because they're the more common ones, and there are some of the ones that are more agreed upon. If you look at different resources on Gestalt, they'll have different lists of what the laws are. But these are ones that tend to appear in most, if not all, of those lists. And it's all about grouping. It's all about taking individual elements and having the viewer see them as a whole. So similarity is looking at, as it says, objects that share certain traits are going to get grouped together. They don't even have to be on the same location on a page. If we see objects that are all the same size, all the same color, all the same shape, or all the same type, we will group those together. So if you want your viewer to look at a bunch of things and draw that information from them, then make sure, they give the example of the dogs here. I can have a big dog and a little dog, but if they share the same color and they're wearing the same collar and they're facing the same direction, even though one is big and one is small, our eyes will group those 2 pieces of information together and be able to process them more quickly. So similar characteristics. They don't have to be identical, but there need to be characteristics within that they share. So that's things that are similar. And then it talks about how to take advantage of that. They do point out, you can use it in reverse if you want something to stick out. If you want your viewer to look at one piece of information as being more important, then try to make it dissimilar. Proximity, this I think is a pretty straightforward one. It has to do with how things are physically to each other, how close are they to each other. So between the image here on the left and the image on the right. Obviously, when these things are grouped, we tend to not see it. On the left, it's whatever this works out to be, I guess, 32 individual dots. This side, we process it much more quickly as 8 groups. And then we go into that and say, well, each group is made up of 4 elements. So by bringing things closer together, closer to each other on the page, that is a way to also simplify the information. And then it talks about how to apply that law. Closure. This is an interesting one because it is a way to reduce the amount of information on a page and still have your viewer get the information they need. So we've discovered that the brain is really great at trying to complete patterns that are incomplete or look for what is not there. So they point out this object up here is actually 5 Pac-Man shapes that are all facing each other, but you probably immediately see a star in the middle of it, even though there is no star there, there's no outline, there's nothing in this center area other than white space. It's no different from the rest of the white space, but our brains are constantly looking for patterns, so it tries to fill in the gaps. They point out the logo here, the panda. If you were to draw the complete panda, that might get a little busy on the page and be too much information, but they figured out they could simplify it down to simply some black shapes, and our brains then automatically complete the rest of the outline of the panda. So this is a way to pare down the amount of information or simplify the information on a page without reducing what your student will actually get out of it. So that's a good one for simplifying. Continuity is kind of related to the previous one in that, again, our brain is constantly trying to make connections. So if it sees something that suggests a continuation, your brain will automatically try to make that continuation. So you see an arrow pointing in a direction, your brain will automatically continue that line over to whatever's being pointed at. This hand up here with the finger pointing down immediately draws your eye down towards this information. So pay attention to this. A lot of places where this comes into play is if you have a person's face in an image and that face is looking in a direction, it will automatically draw your viewer's eyes in that direction. So you can either use that, or if you're not paying attention to it, it can get in the way, because if the face is looking to the left and the information you want your viewer looking at is on the right, then you are kind of splitting your viewer's brains by making them think they have to look in 2 directions at once. So this is usually having to do with lines and curves, that lines and curves we tend to fill in and we tend to continue them going further than they actually are on the page. So that's another way to either simplify something or to draw attention to an object by using incomplete lines. And then figure and ground is another one that when you have images on a page, some of them will be viewed as background and some of them will be viewed as foreground. And if you're not careful, sometimes background to some viewers will become the foreground, and then they will be paying attention to the wrong information. They point out here where you've got kind of the outline of, I guess it would be Penguin from the Batman series, and the upside down image is Batman, but which one is the one that's the more important to pay attention to? Same thing with the image on the right, and there's a lot of variations of this. You could see it as, I don't know, a lamp or a cup, or you see it as 2 faces that are facing each other in the stem of the cup. So if I want my viewers to focus on the background, be careful about the foreground getting in the way of that. So you want to make sure that the information that you're putting on the page, that it's very clear what is not supposed to be paid attention to, what is the background information, and then in contrast, what is the foreground. So make sure that you've clearly identified those. So these are just a few of the approaches to the Gestalt idea, that in order to improve our graphics, we want to make sure that we're taking into account these various items. So now is the activity portion of this week's class. Again, as I did last week, I'm trying to fold a couple of goals into one. So we are going to be using a database activity. That is where each of you is going to create a database entry. What is that entry going to be about? That is here in the database activity. So we now have looked at these 5 Gestalt laws from the reading. You are going to pick one of those laws. All I would ask is maybe check the database activity first and see, you may find that a lot of people have already done the similarity law. So if you see that a bunch of people have already done one and one of the other laws has not had any attention, maybe try to pick one of those other laws so that we can get a range of entries here. So, but you will pick one of the laws, and then I've provided you 3 instructional graphics that are right in the Moodle, design examples 1, 2, and 3. And I've also given links to those right here in the database activity. You will pick one of those 3 graphics. Once you've picked it, save it to your computer. And usually you can just right-click on the image and say Save As or Save to Computer, just because you're going to want to upload that image to your database entry. And the easiest way to do that is just to save the image to your desktop or to a folder and then move it from there. So pick one of the 3 images. It doesn't have to be a good example of the law you've picked. It could be a bad example of the law you've picked. So you've picked a law, you've picked an image. Analyze the image in terms of the law you chose. So if you chose similarity and you chose the first image, you will look at the first image and try to decide whether that person did a good job of using similarity in the creation of the graphic. Did they do a good or poor job? Based on what kind of a job they did, what do you think the instructional impact is? Did the fact that they used the law well or that they didn't use the law well, did that impact the viewer's effectiveness in terms of being able to get the information that they need? And then once you've given some thought to that, you're going to create a database entry right here on the database activity. You'll click this button that says Add Entry. And when you do that, you will have 4 fields to fill in. One is just the name of the principle you chose. Give a brief 1-sentence summary of the principle, not of your image, but of the principle. Then I want you to insert the image you chose so that that's right here in the database entry. And then a couple of sentences about how the use or misuse of that particular law or principle impacted your understanding of the image. So a title, a brief description, the image itself, and then a reflection on how the law applied to the image you chose. This database activity, the difference between it and the glossary is that a glossary basically is just a single entry. You have a title, you have some text, and you can format some things into that text, but that's really it. This is a database, so you as the instructor can decide what types of fields, what types of information you want your users to enter. Then you also can set up the way that the data is viewed. You can set up a default template so that when the viewers go in and look at it, you can kind of format how they see the content that the users have put in. So that is the main difference between the database and the glossary activity we did last week. So in order to complete this, you've already read the Gestalt reading. Pick a law, pick one of the 3 images, be a teacher and assess that image in the context of the law you chose, and then come here to this activity and create a new entry for the activity or for the law that you chose and the image you chose. And then what we should see through the week is a list of entries in the database that then people can take a look at to see what people said about things as they went. All right, so I'm going to stop this video here. If you want to do this activity now, you may certainly do so. If you want to come back and do the activity later in the week, then you could go right ahead to the third video, which talks mainly about the assignments for next week. If you want to do the activity now, then just when you complete the activity, then go on to the third video and watch that for the final wrap-up for this week. All right, so I'm going to sign off for now, and I will see everybody in video 3.